Close your eyes and imagine a galaxy at peace. 10,000 Jedi Knights serving as guardians of justice and keepers of the light. Temples rising from countless worlds, filled with younglings learning the ancient ways of the Force. Meditation chambers where masters commune with the living energy that binds all things together. Archives holding millennia of accumulated wisdom, protected and preserved for future generations. Now watch as all of it burns. The Great Jedi Purge stands as one of the most catastrophic events in galactic history.
A coordinated genocide that saw the near-total extinction of an order that had endured for over 25,000 years.
This wasn't a military defeat in the traditional sense. This was betrayal orchestrated on a scale so massive that it reshaped the very fabric of the galaxy. Brothers turning on brothers, students murdered by their own protectors, children slaughtered in halls that should have been sanctuaries. The purge began with a single command, 2 words that would echo through history, carrying with them the weight of thousands of extinguished lives. Execute Order 66. When Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine spoke those words in 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, he set in motion the culmination of a plan that had been brewing in darkness for over 1,000 years. But to truly understand the magnitude of what occurred during those dark days and the years that followed, we need to journey back through time. We need to understand not just the how, but the why. We need to see the pieces moving into place across decades, the careful manipulations, the seeds planted in fertile ground that would eventually grow into a forest of death. The 1,000-year plan, the story of the Great Jedi Purge, truly begins approximately 1,032 years before the Battle of Yavin, when the Sith were seemingly destroyed by the Jedi Order. The great Sith Wars had raged across the galaxy, consuming worlds and lives in equal measure. Battle after battle saw the dark side wielders pushed further back, their numbers dwindling, their strongholds falling. The Jedi believed, as they had believed before, that they had finally succeeded in eradicating their ancient enemy. They were wrong. One Sith Lord survived the final battle. Darth Bane, a warrior philosopher who looked upon the ashes of the Sith Empire and saw not defeat, but opportunity. He understood what so many Dark Lords before him had failed to grasp. The Sith had always destroyed themselves from within. Ambition turned inward. Apprentices murdering masters before they were ready, infighting that weakened them against their common enemy. The dark side fed on conflict, yes, but uncontrolled conflict led only to chaos and eventual destruction. Bane formulated a new doctrine, a revolutionary approach that would change everything. The rule of 2. One master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. No more vast Sith empires that would draw the attention of the Jedi, no more armies of dark side wielders battling for supremacy. Just 2 working in the shadows, passing knowledge and power from one generation to the next like a carefully tended flame in the darkness. The plan was elegant in its patience. Each master would train their apprentice, teaching them everything they knew. The apprentice would eventually surpass the master and kill them, taking a new apprentice and continuing the cycle. With each generation, the Sith would grow stronger, more cunning, more powerful. And all the while, the Jedi would believe themselves victorious, would grow complacent in their dominance. For a millennium, this plan unfolded in perfect secrecy. Sith Lords operated in the shadows of galactic society, influencing events, manipulating political systems, slowly corrupting the very foundations of the Republic the Jedi swore to protect. They were patient, they were disciplined, they waited for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came with Darth Plagueis and his apprentice, a Naboo human who would take the name Darth Sidious. Plagueis was a master of Sith alchemy and dark side manipulation, obsessed with conquering death itself through the Force. But his greatest creation was not his research into immortality. It was his apprentice. Sidious possessed a gift for manipulation that exceeded even his master's considerable skills. He could read people, understand their desires and fears, their weaknesses and strength. He could present himself as whatever they needed him to be. To the Naboo, he was Sheev Palpatine, an earnest politician dedicated to public service. To his Sith master, he was a loyal apprentice absorbing ancient knowledge. To the Republic Senate, he would become a voice of reason and moderation. And like every Sith apprentice before him, Sidious eventually murdered his master. But unlike those who came before, Sidious had perfected the long game. He didn't simply seize power through brute force. He orchestrated events on a galactic scale, moving pieces on a board so vast that few could see the pattern emerging. Sidious engineered his own rise to Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. He created the Separatist Crisis, a conflict that would tear the galaxy apart and provide the perfect cover for his ultimate plan. He manipulated trade disputes, fanned the flames of political discord, and convinced thousands of star systems that the Republic had become corrupt and bloated, that independence was their only salvation. But the Separatists were never meant to win. They were a tool, a means to an end. The real genius of Sidious's plan lay in what the conflict would allow him to create. An army, a force, loyal not to the Republic, not to the Jedi, but to him alone. The clone army conspiracy, the foundation for the Great Jedi Purge, was laid years before Order 66 would be uttered. On a rain-soaked world beyond the edge of the Republic's boundaries, Kamino, a planet of vast oceans and towering cities built on massive stilts, was home to some of the galaxy's finest cloners. The Kaminoans possessed knowledge and technology that could create life itself. Custom designed for specific purposes, a decade before the Clone Wars would begin, a Jedi Master named Sifo Dyas approached the Kaminoans with an unusual request. Sifo Dyas was known among the Jedi Council for his prophetic visions, his ability to glimpse potential futures through the Force. What he saw in those visions horrified him. War was coming. A war that would consume the galaxy. The Jedi Order would need an army to defend the Republic, and they would need it soon. The Council, however, did not share his concerns. To them, Sifo Dyas's warnings seemed like paranoid fantasies. The Republic had stood for 1,000 years without a standing army, relying instead on local defense forces and the Jedi themselves to maintain peace. Raising an army would be an act of aggression, a violation of everything the Republic stood for. But Sifo Dyas could not shake what he had seen. Taking it upon himself to act, he secretly commissioned the Kaminoans to create a clone army for the Republic. He used his authority as a Jedi Master and member of the Council to authorize the project, providing the Kaminoans with DNA from a Mandalorian bounty hunter named Jango Fett. Fett was to be the template, his genetic code the foundation for millions of soldiers. What Sifo Dyas didn't know was that his visions had been influenced. The Sith had already infiltrated his mind, guiding his prophetic dreams toward a specific outcome. And once the project was underway, Sifo Dyas became a liability. Count Dooku, a former Jedi Master who had left the Order and secretly become Sidious's new apprentice under the name Darth Tyrannus, arranged for Sifo Dyas' death. With the Jedi Master eliminated, Dooku took control of the Clone Army project. He worked directly with the Kaminoans, making specific modifications to their creation process. On the surface, these modifications seemed reasonable. Accelerated growth rates so the clones would mature faster, enhanced obedience and discipline, reduced individuality to improve unit cohesion, all standard military optimizations. But hidden within the genetic manipulation was something far more sinister. Each clone was implanted with a biochip, a small organic computer integrated directly into their brain during the earliest stages of development. The Kaminoans were told this chip was a failsafe, a behavioral modification protocol designed to prevent clone troopers from becoming a threat to the Republic in case of malfunction or Jedi going rogue. In reality, the chips contained 150 contingency orders, protocols that could be activated by voice command. Most of these orders were legitimate military directives. Arrest the Supreme Chancellor, secure strategic locations, protocols for various emergency scenarios, but buried among them was Order 66. Order 66 designated all Jedi as traitors to the Republic. Upon activation, the chip would override a clone's free will, his loyalty to his Jedi generals, even his own sense of right and wrong. It would transform brothers-in-arms into executioners without hesitation or mercy.
The clones wouldn't question.
They wouldn't resist, they would simply obey. For the first years of the Clone Wars, the biochips functioned perfectly. Millions of clone troopers fought alongside their Jedi generals, forming bonds of trust and brotherhood. The Jedi never suspected that the men they commanded, the soldiers they fought beside and saved and bled with, carried within their skulls the instruments of the Order's destruction. But cracks began to show in the system. During the Battle of Ringo Venda, a clone trooper designated as CT-5385 but known to his brothers as Toop suffered a malfunction in his inhibitor chip. In the middle of battle, Toop suddenly turned on his commanding officer, Jedi General Tiplar, and shot her dead. The premature activation of Order 66 had occurred. Toop's condition deteriorated rapidly. He alternated between his normal self and a trance-like state, repeating the phrase, "Good soldiers follow orders," over and over. His brother, an ARC trooper named Fives, became convinced that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't battle fatigue or combat stress. Something was controlling Toop, something biological. Fives began to investigate, tracing the problem back to the mysterious chip in Toop's brain. When he discovered that all clones had these chips, alarm bells began ringing. Why had they never been told about this? What was its purpose? Fives went deeper, uncovering the horrifying truth. The chips were designed to force them to kill the Jedi. The betrayal was already built into them, just waiting for activation. Armed with this knowledge, Fives managed to get an audience with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine himself. He didn't know that he was standing before the very architect of the conspiracy, that his desperate attempt to warn the Republic was actually delivering him directly into the hands of his enemy. Palpatine was brilliantly convincing. He expressed concern, promised to investigate, and then quietly arranged for Fives to be discredited and killed. The clone trooper died trying to warn his Jedi general, Anakin Skywalker, about the chips and the conspiracy. Skywalker heard his words but couldn't prove them, and the investigation went nowhere. The plan continued, undirected. For the Kaminoans, the incident was a minor quality control issue, quickly resolved. For the Jedi, it was a tragic mystery, another casualty of war. But for Sidious, it was a close call. The plan had nearly been exposed years too early. He would need to move carefully to ensure that when Order 66 was finally activated, there would be no warning, no chance for the Jedi to prepare or defend themselves. The conspiracy was protected by its own audacity. Who could believe that the clone army fighting to defend the Republic was simultaneously programmed to destroy its greatest defenders? Who would suspect that the kindly Supreme Chancellor, working tirelessly to bring the war to a peaceful conclusion, was the very Sith Lord orchestrating everything from the shadows?
As the Clone Wars ground on, the pieces continued to fall into place.
The Jedi were scattered across the galaxy, leading clone battalions on distant worlds. Their numbers, already reduced by years of warfare, were stretched thin. The Council spent more time in war rooms than meditation chambers. They were generals now, not peacekeepers. They were exactly where Sidious needed them to be. Alone, isolated, surrounded by the instruments of their destruction, trusting the very soldiers who would be compelled to kill them. The final days and the waning days of the Clone Wars, as the conflict approached its crescendo, the pieces of Sidious's grand design finally began to converge. The Outer Rim sieges saw the Jedi push to their absolute limits, engaging separatist forces across dozens of key systems. Republic victory seemed within reach, but the cost in Jedi lives continued to mount. Masters and knights fell in battle. Padawans died leading clone squadrons against droid armies. The Order was bleeding, weakening with each passing day. On Coruscant, the capital world of the Republic, political tensions had reached a breaking point. Chancellor Palpatine had been granted emergency powers at the war's outset, powers that were supposed to be temporary, but as the conflict dragged on, those powers had been expanded, extended, transformed into something approaching absolute authority. Some in the Senate grew concerned about the Republic transforming into something unrecognizable, but opposition to the Chancellor was viewed as treasonous, as supporting the separatist cause. The Jedi Council, too, had grown wary of Palpatine. They sensed something wrong, a disturbance in the Force that seemed to emanate from the Senate building itself. The dark side had grown stronger on Coruscant, clouding their ability to see the future clearly. Master Yoda felt it most acutely, the sense that they were all walking a path toward some terrible precipice. Into this tension walked Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one of prophecy, though few still believed in that ancient Jedi legend. Anakin was a paradox. Immensely powerful in the Force, skilled beyond his years, a hero of the Republic who had saved countless lives and won countless battles. But he was also conflicted, tormented by attachments that the Jedi Code forbade, driven by fears that he could never quite master. Palpatine had been cultivating a relationship with Anakin since the young Jedi was a child. The Chancellor presented himself as a mentor figure, someone who believed in Anakin without reservation, who saw his potential without the Council's constant doubt and criticism. Over the years, this relationship had deepened. Palpatine told Anakin things that the Jedi Council kept from him. He made the young knight feel valued in ways the Order never quite managed.
As the war neared its end, Anakin began experiencing prophetic visions.
He saw his secret wife, Senator Padme Amidala, dying in childbirth. The visions were vivid, terrible, filled with her pain and his helplessness. Anakin had lost his mother to violence. He could not bear the thought of losing Padme as well. Desperation took root in his heart, growing like a cancer, consuming his judgment. Palpatine seized upon this desperation with the skill of a master manipulator. In a private meeting, the Chancellor revealed himself to Anakin as Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord the Jedi had been seeking throughout the war. But he presented this revelation not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He claimed to possess knowledge of the dark side that could prevent death itself. He could save Padme, he told Anakin. The Jedi didn't have this power. Only through studying the dark side could Anakin gain the abilities he needed. Torn between his duty as a Jedi and his love for his wife, Anakin initially chose duty. He reported Palpatine's identity to Jedi Master Mace Windu, one of the most senior members of the Council. Windu, recognizing the gravity of the situation, gathered 3 other Jedi Masters. Kit Fisto, Ajin Kolar, and Saesee Tiin, all renowned warriors and powerful Force users, accompanied Windu to arrest the Chancellor. What followed would be remembered as one of the most significant lightsaber duels in galactic history, though few would ever know its true details.
In Palpatine's private office, high in the Senate building, the 4 Jedi Masters confronted the Sith Lord.
Palpatine moved with shocking speed. His lightsaber seemed to appear in his hand from nowhere, its crimson blade igniting with a snap hiss that echoed through the office. He struck before the Jedi could fully react, his blade finding Ajin Kolar's heart in the first second of combat. Saesee Tiin fell moments later, unable to defend against the Chancellor's impossible speed and ferocity. Kit Fisto lasted longer, his superior reflexes and underwater fighting style allowing him to hold his own against the Sith Lord's assault. But in the end, he too fell to Sidious's blade, leaving only Mace Windu standing. Windu was a master of Form 7 lightsaber combat, a style that allowed him to channel his inner darkness without surrendering to it, to fight with controlled aggression and overwhelming power. The duel between Windu and Sidious shook the office, lightning arcing from the Sith Lord's hands, reflecting off Windu's violet blade. Furniture was destroyed, windows shattered. The 2 warriors pushed each other to their absolute limits. Finally, Windu gained the upper hand. He pressed his attack, driving Sidious back against the window. The Sith Lord's lightning was turned back upon him by Windu's blade, scarring Palpatine's face, transforming his features into a twisted mask of corruption. Sidious appeared, defeated, helpless, begging for mercy. Anakin arrived at this critical moment, having followed the Jedi Masters despite Windu's orders to remain at the temple. He saw Windu standing over a defenseless old man, lightsaber raised for a killing blow. Sidious played his part perfectly, pleading for mercy, claiming that the Jedi were taking over, that they were betraying the Republic. Windu insisted that Palpatine was too dangerous to leave alive, that he controlled the Senate and the courts, that he was too powerful to be imprisoned. The Sith Lord had to die. But Anakin, desperate to save Padme, desperate to preserve the one person who claimed to be able to help him, made a choice that would doom the galaxy. As Windu prepared to strike the final blow, Anakin ignited his lightsaber and severed the Jedi Master's hand. The violet blade clattered to the floor along with Windu's severed limb. Before the Master could react, before he could even process his student's betrayal, Sidious unleashed a torrent of Force lightning. The pure dark side energy lifted Windu from his feet and hurled him through the shattered window. The Master of the Jedi Order plummeted from the Senate building, disappearing into the Coruscant night. In that moment, Anakin Skywalker was lost. Sidious, his face now hideously scarred but his victory complete, offered Anakin everything he craved: power to save Padme, recognition of his abilities, freedom from the Jedi's restrictions. All Anakin had to do was kneel to accept his place as a Sith apprentice. Anakin knelt. Darth Vader was born. Sidious wasted no time. He had waited a millennium for this moment, and now every second counted. He gave his new apprentice his first mission. The Jedi Temple stood as a symbol of everything the Sith had fought against for 1,000 years. It was home to thousands of Jedi, including younglings, Padawans, and those too old or injured to fight in the wars. It was the repository of countless holocrons and artifacts. It represented the accumulated wisdom and power of 25,000 years of Jedi history. Sidious ordered Vader to destroy it all. Operation Nightfall Vader approached the Jedi Temple as the sun set over Coruscant, the massive structure casting long shadows across the city planet's endless urban landscape. He led the entire 501st Legion, elite clone troopers who had fought under his command as Anakin Skywalker. These were the men he had led through countless battles, soldiers he had saved and who had saved him in return. They knew him, they trusted him. They had no idea what he had become. The temple's massive entrance gate stood open, as they always did, a symbol of the Jedi Order's transparency and dedication to serving the people. The guards at the entrance were Jedi Temple guards, anonymous warriors who had surrendered their identities to protect this sacred place. They wore masks and traditional armor, wielding yellow-bladed lightsaber pikes. The first temple guard to see Vader approaching recognized him despite everything. Through the Force, through years of sensing Skywalker's presence in the temple, the guard knew who stood before him. "Skywalker?" he said, confusion evident even through the mask's emotionless facade. Vader's response was to ignite his lightsaber. The blue blade, the same weapon he had carried throughout the Clone Wars, hummed to life. But the Force signature that radiated from the man wielding it was wrong, twisted, saturated with the dark side. The temple guard barely had time to register the change before Vader's blade pierced his chest. The attack had begun. The 501st Legion poured into the temple behind their general, their white armor soon to be stained with blood and ash. The clones moved with military precision, clearing the lower levels room by room. They encountered Jedi healers, archivists, instructors, and their response to each was the same: overwhelming blaster fire, no warnings. No arrests, just execution. Some Jedi fought back. Masters and knights grabbed their lightsabers and engaged the intruders, their blades deflecting blaster bolts, cutting through clone trooper armor. But they were vastly outnumbered, and many had been caught completely off guard. Meditation chambers became killing grounds. Libraries echoed with the sounds of combat. Hallways filled with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. Vader moved through the temple like a force of nature, unstoppable and merciless. He encountered Sin Dralig, the legendary battlemaster who had taught lightsaber combat to generations of Jedi. Dralig was widely considered one of the finest duelists in the Order, a master of multiple forms, a warrior who could hold his own against almost anyone. He lasted less than a minute against Vader. The Dark Lord's power had grown exponentially with his fall to the dark side. The same abilities that made Anakin Skywalker a hero of the Republic were amplified and twisted by his hatred and pain. He moved faster than Dralig could track, struck with power that overwhelmed even the Battlemaster's perfect defensive form. Vader's blade found its mark again and again, cutting through Dralig's defenses and ending the life of one of the Order's greatest teachers. Fighting alongside Dralig were two Padawans, Benny and Wima Rio. They stood no chance. Vader killed Benny with a strike to the throat, then cut down Mario before the young Padawan could even process his friend's death. These weren't warriors who died in glorious combat. They were children, students, murdered by someone who should have been protecting them.
Throughout the temple, similar scenes played out.
Jedi Master Shak Ti, a Togruta warrior who had overseen the clone training program on Kamino, was stationed at the temple when the attack began. She tried to organize a defense, to rally the Jedi who remained and mount some kind of resistance. But Vader found her in the temple's communication center. She never had a chance to send a warning to Jedi across the galaxy. Vader's blade pierced her back, killing her instantly. The security recordings captured everything. Holocams throughout the temple documented the massacre, preserving the images that would later be used to frame the Jedi as traitors. The footage showed Jedi cutting down clone troopers, fighting desperately to defend their home. But it didn't show the context, the betrayal, the fact that the clones had struck first and without provocation. As Vader cleared the upper levels, a group of younglings huddled together in the council chamber. These were children, some as young as 4 or 5 years old, who had been living and training at the temple since they were infants. They had been taught that the temple was safe, that the Jedi would always protect them, that they had nothing to fear. When Vader entered the council chamber, one of the children approached him. The boy recognized Skywalker, had probably seen the famous Jedi Knight walking the temple halls countless times. "Master Skywalker," the child said, relief evident in his voice. "There are too many of them."
"What are we going to do?" Vader's response was to ignite his lightsaber.
What happened next represented the absolute nadir of the Dark Lord's fall. These weren't warriors. They weren't even Padawans trained in combat. They were children, completely helpless, looking to an adult for protection. And Vader slaughtered them all. He moved through the group with mechanical efficiency, his blade finding one small body after another. Their screams echoed through the council chamber, through the Force itself, a psychic wound that every Jedi in the galaxy would feel. The destruction wasn't limited to the living. Clone troopers under Vader's command began systematically destroying the Jedi archives, the vast library that held over 100,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Holocrons containing the wisdom of ancient Jedi masters were smashed or seized for Sidious to study. Texts describing Force techniques lost to time were burned. Artifacts of immense power and historical significance were either taken for the Sith to corrupt or destroyed outright. Outside the temple, Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan approached the entrance. He had seen the smoke rising from the temple and came to investigate. What he found horrified him. Clone troopers stood guard at the entrance, their armor scorched and bloody. When Organa tried to enter, Commander Appo, who had served loyally throughout the Clone Wars, aimed his blaster at the senator and ordered him to leave. As Organa retreated to his speeder, he witnessed a young Padawan named Zed Jukasa attempting to escape the temple. The boy, barely a teenager, fought valiantly against the clone troopers at the entrance. His green lightsaber deflected bolt after bolt, and he managed to cut down several clones before their sheer numbers overwhelmed him. Organa watched in horror as the Padawan fell, gunned down on the temple's grand staircase. That image would stay with Organa for the rest of his life. It would influence his decision to join what would eventually become the Rebel Alliance. It would shape his understanding of what the Republic had become under Palpatine's rule. But in that moment, all he could do was flee, knowing that if he stayed, he too would be killed. As the attack continued, several Jedi did manage to escape. Jedi Master Kelleran BEQ, who oversaw the training of younglings, fought his way through clone troopers while protecting a small child named Grogu. BEU managed to get the youngling onto a transport and off Coruscant before the planetary lockdown was complete.
The details of their escape would only emerge years later, but in the chaos of Operation Nightfall, such miraculous survivals were rare.
By the time night fell completely over Coruscant, the Jedi Temple was a burning ruin. Flames consumed entire wings of the ancient structure. Smoke rose into the sky like a funeral pyre. The 501st Legion had suffered casualties, clone troopers killed by Jedi defending their home, but the military objective had been achieved. The temple was secured, the Jedi within were dead or captured. Vader stood amidst the carnage he had created, his armor and cloak stained with blood and soot. His lightsaber hung at his side, its blade darkened with the residue of countless kills. the man who had been Anakin Skywalker, the hero with no fear, the chosen one who was prophesied to bring balance to the Force, had murdered hundreds of Jedi. He had killed children who called him Master. He had destroyed the only home he had known since he was 9 years old. And this was only the beginning. Order 66 across the galaxy, while Vader executed Operation Nightfall on Coruscant, Palpatine activated the second phase of his plan. From his office in the Senate building, the newly revealed Sith Lord transmitted a single command to clone commanders across the galaxy. The words were simple, clinical, devoid of emotion or explanation. Execute Order 66. On thousands of worlds, in the middle of battles and strategy sessions and quiet moments of rest, clone troopers received the command. Their inhibitor chips activated immediately. Men who had fought alongside their Jedi generals for years, who had formed bonds of loyalty and friendship, who had saved each other's lives countless times, suddenly saw their commanders as threats. The programming overrode everything. Their personalities, their memories, their sense of right and wrong, all of it was suppressed beneath the overwhelming imperative to obey. On the lush forest world of Felucia, Jedi Master Aayla Secura led the 327th Star Corps in operations against separatist forces.
Aayla was a Twilight Jedi known for her compassion and her skill with a lightsaber.
She had formed close relationships with her clone troopers, particularly Commander Bly, who had served under her throughout the war. They trusted each other implicitly. When Bly received Order 66, Aayla was walking ahead of the formation, her attention on a native bird flying overhead. The moment was peaceful, a brief respite from the constant violence of war. Bly raised his weapon without hesitation, without warning, without any visible struggle. He and several other troopers opened fire simultaneously. Aayla didn't even have time to draw her lightsaber. Blaster bolts struck her in the back, piercing her Jedi robes and armor. She fell to the ground, and the clone troopers continued firing, pumping bolt after bolt into her body long after she had stopped moving. The overkill was protocol, ensuring that even a Jedi couldn't survive or play dead. On the icy bridges of Megiddo, Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi led clone troopers of the Galactic Marines against separatist forces. Ki-Adi-Mundi was a Syrian Jedi, recognizable by his high conical cranium that housed his binary brain. He was a senior member of the Jedi Council, a wise and experienced warrior who had survived countless battles. When Commander Bakara received Order 66, the clones were in the middle of an assault on a fortified position. Ki-Adi-Mundi sensed something wrong through the Force, a disturbance that made him turn to face his own troops. He saw them raising their weapons, saw the coldness in their eyes where moments before there had been camaraderie. The Jedi Master ignited his lightsaber and managed to deflect the first volley of blaster fire. His blue blade moved in defensive arcs, sending bolts back toward the clones. But there were too many of them, and they had caught him in the open. More and more troopers opened fire from different angles, overwhelming even Ki-Adi-Mundi's defensive skills. Blaster bolts found their mark, and the Jedi Master fell on the frozen bridge, another victim of the Purge. In the skies above Cato Neimoidia, Jedi Master Plo Koon flew his Delta-7 Aether Sprite starfighter on a patrol mission. Plo Koon was a Keldor Jedi, known for his wisdom and his particular affinity for piloting. He wore a breathing mask that allowed him to survive in oxygen-rich environments, and he had formed especially close bonds with the clone pilots who served under him. When Captain Jag received Order 66, Plo Koon was flying in formation with several clone pilots. There was no warning, no chance to evade. Jag and the other clone pilots simply opened fire on their commander's starfighter. Laser cannons tore through the unshielded vessel's hull, Plo Koon died instantly when his fighter exploded, the debris raining down on Cato Nemoidia's cityscape below. His astromech droid, R4, F5 was destroyed alongside him. On the desert world of Salu Kami, Jedi Master Stas Ali conducted patrol operations on a speeder bike. Stas Ali was a Thalothian Jedi, cousin to the late Adi Gallia, and a member of the Jedi Council. She had been dispatched to the Outer Rim to help coordinate Republic forces in the final push against the Separatists. When Commander Neo received Order 66, he and another clone trooper were escorting Stas Ali on their own speeder bikes across an open plain. The Jedi Master had her attention on the horizon, watching for Separatist activity. Neo simply pulled alongside her and opened fire. His blaster struck Stas Ali multiple times, causing her speeder to crash in a fiery explosion.
The clones didn't even slow down, continuing their patrol as if nothing had happened.
On Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld, the situation played out differently. Grand Master Yoda, the oldest and most powerful member of the Jedi Council, was coordinating Republic forces alongside Wookiee warriors. When Commander Gree received Order 66, he and his men approached Yoda from behind, weapons ready. But Yoda was over 800 years old. He had trained tens of thousands of Jedi. His connection to the Force was deeper and more refined than almost any living being. He sensed the betrayal before it happened, felt the shift in the Force that accompanied the activation of the inhibitor chips across the galaxy. When Gree raised his weapon, Yoda moved. His small stature belied incredible speed and power. His lightsaber ignited and swung in a single fluid motion, decapitating Commander Gree before the clone could fire. The other clones opened fire, but Yoda was already moving, deflecting their bolts and cutting them down with surgical precision. The Wookiees, loyal to Yoda and horrified by the clone's betrayal, immediately came to the Jedi Master's aid. Chewbacca and Tarful helped Yoda escape Kashyyyk aboard a hidden pod, smuggling him away before more clone forces could arrive. Yoda's survival was one of the few bright spots in the massacre, but even the Grand Master couldn't save the other Jedi dying across the galaxy. On Utapau, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi had just defeated General Grievous, the supreme commander of the Separatist droid armies. With Grievous dead, the Clone Wars seemed effectively over. Kenobi was riding his Vractal mount, a large reptilian creature named Boga, along a cliff face when Commander Cody received Order 66. Cody, who had served loyally under Kenobi throughout the war, who had saved the Jedi Master's life and been saved by him in return, aimed an ATT Walker's main cannon at his general and fired. The massive bolt struck the cliff face near Kenobi, causing an explosion that sent both the Jedi and his mount plummeting into the sinkhole below. Cody reported Kenobi dead and moved on to his next objective. Without a second thought, the inhibitor chip had erased years of camaraderie, replaced loyalty with cold efficiency. But unlike many Jedi that day, Obi-Wan survived. He fell into water at the bottom of the sinkhole, and Boga sacrificed herself to cushion his fall. The Jedi Master, wounded and confused, managed to escape Utapau using General Grievous's starfighter. Aboard the Venator-class Star Destroyer Tribunal above Mandalore, former Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano was transporting the captured Sith Lord Maul back to Coruscant. Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order before the war ended, but she had returned at Anakin Skywalker's request to help liberate Mandalore. She had just completed that mission when Order 66 was transmitted. Ahsoka wasn't technically a Jedi anymore, but the Order made no such distinctions. As far as the protocol was concerned, anyone marked as a former Jedi was equally dangerous. Commander Rex, who had served under Anakin and fought alongside Ahsoka throughout the war, received the command while standing in the ship's main hold with her. Rex was one of the most loyal clone troopers in the entire Grand Army. He was also one of the few clones who knew about the inhibitor chips, having been present when Fives tried to reveal the conspiracy. When the order came through, Rex fought against it. He struggled visibly, his hands moving toward his weapons even as his mind screamed in protest. "Find him!" Rex managed to gasp out, his words barely coherent as the chip tried to override his free will. "Fives!" "The nightmare. It's all true." Ahsoka understood instantly. She had heard about Fives' investigation, about his claims of a conspiracy. As Rex's brothers throughout the ship began hunting for her, as clone troopers who had been her friends minutes earlier tried to kill her, Ahsoka made a desperate decision. She freed Maul from his imprisonment. The Sith Lord, delighted by the chaos, immediately began cutting through clone troopers, creating a diversion that allowed Ahsoka to find the ship's medical facilities. There, using a medical droid and her knowledge of the Force, she performed emergency surgery on Rex, removing his inhibitor chip. It was a dangerous procedure, one that could have easily killed him, but it worked. Rex regained control of himself, his personality and free will restored. Together, Ahsoka and Rex fought their way through the Star Destroyer as it fell into disarray. Without proper command, with its internal systems damaged by Maul's rampage, the massive warship began to break apart. They barely made it to an escape shuttle, crash landing on a small moon just as the tribunal exploded. On the moon's surface, surrounded by the graves of clone troopers they had buried, Ahsoka and Rex made a choice. They would fake their deaths. Ahsoka left one of her lightsabers among the wreckage, creating evidence that she had died in the crash. Then they disappeared into the galaxy, joining the growing number of Order 66 survivors, trying to find safety in a universe that had suddenly become incredibly hostile to anyone connected to the Jedi. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds. Jedi Masters like Pong Krell, who had already fallen to the dark side and foreseen Order 66, were executed by their clone troops, even though they weren't technically Jedi anymore. Padawans barely old enough to hold a lightsaber were gunned down in the middle of lessons. Temple guards, who had surrendered their very identities to protect the Order, were killed by the same clone troopers they had fought alongside. Healers, archivists, agricultural corps members, every Jedi across known space became a target. The scale of the betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. Clone troopers had fought alongside their Jedi generals for 3 years. They had formed bonds stronger than simple military camaraderie. They had saved each other's lives countless times. Some clones had developed genuine friendships with their Jedi commanders, sharing stories during quiet moments between battles, learning about the Force and Jedi philosophy, teaching their generals about clone culture and brotherhood. All of that was erased in an instant when the inhibitor chips activated. Clone Commander Cody, who had served loyally under Obi-Wan Kenobi throughout the war, didn't hesitate to fire on his general. Commander Bly, who had fought beside Aayla Secura through dozens of campaigns, gunned her down without a second thought. These weren't men being forced to commit atrocities against their will in any conscious sense. The chips didn't just compel obedience, they rewrote the clones' perception of reality, making them genuinely believe the Jedi were traitors who needed to be eliminated. For the clone troopers themselves, the tragedy extended beyond the Jedi they killed. When the chip's influence faded, when individual clones like Captain Rex had their chips removed, they had to live with the knowledge of what they had done. They had killed friends, mentors, people who had trusted them completely. The psychological damage was devastating. Some clones who later had their chips removed could never reconcile what they had done. They lived with nightmares, with guilt, with the knowledge that their hands had been used to commit genocide, even if their minds hadn't truly been in control. By the time the first galactic night fell after Order 66 was activated, thousands of Jedi were dead. The majority of the Order had been wiped out in a single day. Those who survived did so through luck, through distance from clone forces, through the intervention of friends like the Wookiees who saved Yoda, or through the malfunctioning of inhibitor chips in rare cases. The galaxy that had known Jedi protectors for 25,000 years suddenly found itself without them. And in the power vacuum they left behind, darkness was already rising to fill the void. The morning after Order 66 brought a galaxy transformed beyond recognition. Smoke still rose from the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, its ancient spires damaged and scarred, its halls stained with the blood of those who had called it home. Across thousands of worlds, clone troopers stood guard over the bodies of Jedi generals they had fought beside for years.
The Clone Wars were over, Palpatine announced to the Senate, and the Republic had been saved from treachery.
The Senate convened an emergency session. Palpatine, his face now twisted and scarred from his battle with Mace Windu, presented himself as a victim. The Jedi had attempted to assassinate him, he claimed. They had been plotting to overthrow the Republic and install themselves as the galaxy's rulers. The evidence was compelling, carefully crafted through years of Sith manipulation. Recordings showed Jedi fighting against clone troopers. Reports detailed Jedi resistance to the Republic's forces. The narrative was controlled completely. In that session, Palpatine declared the end of the Republic and the birth of something new. The Galactic Empire would rise from the ashes of the old order, he proclaimed. A safe and secure society protected from the chaos that had nearly consumed them. The Senate, most of its members either corrupted or terrified, applauded. Senator Padme Amidala, her heart breaking, spoke the words that would echo through history. So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause. The transformation was swift and absolute. The Galactic Senate became the Imperial Senate, though its power was now purely symbolic. The clone army became the Imperial Army, its loyalty transferred seamlessly to the new Emperor. Worlds that had fought for the Republic now found themselves under Imperial rule whether they had wanted it or not. Dissent was branded as treason. Opposition was crushed before it could organize. But Palpatine knew that despite Order 66's devastating effectiveness, the job wasn't finished. Hundreds of Jedi had survived the initial purge. Some had been far from clone forces when the Order came through. Others had escaped through skill or luck. A few had never been registered with the Jedi Council and thus weren't tracked in Imperial databases. These survivors represented a threat that could not be ignored. On the steps of the Jedi Temple, now occupied by Imperial forces, Grand Vizier Mas Amedda orchestrated a ceremony designed to send a message to the galaxy.
Clone troopers had recovered thousands of lightsabers from the temple's armory and from the bodies of fallen Jedi.
These weapons, each one a unique creation linked to its wielder through the Force, were piled into a massive furnace. The public burning of the lightsabers was meant to symbolize the end of the Jedi Order, to show that their power was gone, their time finished. Amedda himself threw Grand Master Yoda's lightsaber into the flames, publicly declaring the Jedi extinct.
The kyber crystals within the lightsabers reacted violently to the heat, exploding in brilliant bursts of blue light that sent Amedda and several clone troopers stumbling backward.
Even in destruction, the Jedi's weapons demonstrated the power of the Force. But even as the Empire celebrated its victory, 2 Jedi Masters were infiltrating the temple. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda had both survived Order 66 and had returned to Coruscant despite the incredible danger. They needed to know what had happened, to understand the scope of the catastrophe. More critically, they needed to send a warning to any surviving Jedi who might try to return to the temple. The two masters navigated the temple's secret passages, moving through corridors they had walked for decades. The scene that greeted them was one of absolute devastation. Bodies of Jedi younglings lay where they had fallen. The archives were in ruins, holocrons smashed, texts burned. The meditation chambers where generations had communed with the Force were now silent tombs. In the temple's communication center, they discovered that the Sith had altered the recall beacon. Any Jedi who escaped Order 66 and tried to contact the temple would receive a message telling them to return, that the war was over, that they were safe. It was a trap designed to lure survivors back to Coruscant, where Imperial forces waited to kill them. Yoda and Obi-Wan reprogrammed the beacon, changing the message to a warning. "Avoid the temple," the new transmission said. "Your trust in the Force." It was deliberately vague to avoid Imperial detection, but any Jedi who received it would understand. Don't come back. Don't trust that things are normal. The Jedi Order is gone. While in the communication center, Obi-Wan made the mistake of viewing the temple's security recordings. He watched in horror as his former apprentice, his brother in all but blood, murdered Jedi masters and cut down younglings. The recordings showed Anakin Skywalker, now calling himself Darth Vader, bowing before Emperor Palpatine. The betrayal cut deeper than any lightsaber wound could. Yoda advised destroying the recordings, but Obi-Wan insisted they preserve them. This evidence might be needed someday to understand how the Jedi Order fell, to ensure such a catastrophe could never happen again. Little did they know that these same recordings would eventually help Luke Skywalker understand his father's fall and redemption decades later. Before leaving Coruscant, the two Jedi Masters discussed what they should do about Vader and Palpatine. The Sith had won completely. The galaxy belonged to them now. Should they mount some kind of resistance? Try to rebuild the Jedi Order immediately? Or should they go into hiding and wait for a better opportunity? Yoda made the difficult decision. They would split up. The Sith Lords had to be stopped, but they were too powerful to confront directly, not in the current climate. Obi-Wan would go to Mustafar, where Vader had been sent, to eliminate the Separatist leadership. Yoda would confront Palpatine directly. If either of them succeeded, the Sith threat would be crippled. If they failed, at least they would have tried to prevent the darkness from spreading further. The confrontations that followed would become legend. Yoda infiltrated the Senate building and challenged Palpatine in his private office. The duel between the ancient Jedi Master and the Sith Lord shook the entire chamber. Force lightning crackled through the air. Palpatine's desk was hurled at Yoda with the Force. The two masters of their respective arts pushed each other to absolute limits. Ultimately, Yoda was forced to flee, not because Palpatine was necessarily more powerful, but because the Grand Master realized he couldn't win. Even if he killed Palpatine here and now, Vader would survive. The Empire would continue. Clone armies would hunt down any remaining Jedi. Victory in a single duel wouldn't undo the political and military reality that Palpatine had created. On Mustafar, Obi-Wan confronted Vader amidst rivers of lava and collapsing mining facilities. Their duel was brutal and personal. Where Yoda and Palpatine fought with cold efficiency and mastery of the Force, Obi-Wan and Vader fought with passion and pain. They had been master and apprentice, friends and brothers. Obi-Wan had believed in Anakin when no one else did, and Anakin had betrayed everything they stood for. The duel raged across the Mustafar mining complex. Vader fought with pure aggression, channeling his pain and hatred into overwhelming power. Obi-Wan fought defensively, using the patient defensive Form 3 technique he had perfected over decades. Eventually, Vader's aggression became his weakness. He made a jump that Obi-Wan warned him not to attempt. The Jedi Master struck, severing Vader's legs and his remaining organic arm in a single stroke. Vader fell onto the volcanic shore, his body burning from proximity to the lava flow. He should have died there. By all rights, the injuries should have been fatal, but Obi-Wan couldn't bring himself to deliver a mercy stroke. He took Anakin's lightsaber and left, believing his former apprentice would die from his injuries. Palpatine arrived shortly after and saved Vader's life, encasing him in the black armor that would become iconic throughout the galaxy. The suit wasn't just life support, it was a constant reminder of Vader's failure, a prison that kept him in perpetual pain, that ensured he could never achieve his full potential in the Force. But it also made him terrifying, an image of dark power that would be used to enforce the Emperor's will for decades to come. With both the Jedi Master's attempts to end the Sith failing, Yoda and Obi-Wan met one final time. They had to accept reality. The Sith had won. The Jedi Order was gone. The Empire controlled the galaxy. Fighting openly would accomplish nothing except getting them killed. Instead, they would go into hiding, preserving what knowledge they could, waiting for a future opportunity to restore balance to the Force. But before they went into exile, they had one more responsibility. Senator Amidala, Anakin's secret wife, had given birth to twins, Luke and Leia Skywalker, children of prophecy born from the union of a Jedi and a senator in a galaxy that had outlawed both love and hope. These children couldn't be allowed to fall into Palpatine's hands. If the Emperor learned of their existence, he would either kill them or corrupt them as he had corrupted their father. The Jedi Masters made arrangements. Leia would go to Bail Organa on Alderaan, raised as the senator's daughter in the halls of power. Luke would go to Tatooine to be raised by Anakin's stepbrother, Owen Lars, and his wife Beru, hidden on the remote desert world where Vader would never think to look. The twins would be separated, their connection hidden, their potential kept secret until the time was right. Yoda would go to Dagobah, a remote swamp world saturated with the dark side of the Force, where his presence would be masked from any Sith who might search for him. Obi-Wan would go to Tatooine, taking the name Ben Kenobi and living as a hermit in the Jundland wastes, watching over Luke from a distance. As the two masters prepared to part ways, possibly forever, they shared what knowledge they could. Yoda revealed that Obi-Wan's former master, Qui-Gon Jinn, had discovered a way to preserve his consciousness after death, to become one with the Force while maintaining his identity. This knowledge, this hope that death was not the end for a Jedi who understood the Force deeply enough, was perhaps the only bright spot in the darkness that had consumed the galaxy. They went into exile believing they were the last Jedi. They didn't know about Ahsoka and Rex hiding in the Outer Rim. They didn't know about Cal Kestis, a Padawan who would spend years as a scrapper on Bracca, hiding his Force abilities. They didn't know about Quinlan Vos, who would dedicate himself to helping other survivors escape Imperial persecution. They didn't know about dozens of other Jedi scattered across the galaxy, each believing they were alone, each trying to survive in a universe that now hunted them. But most critically, they didn't know about the organization Palpatine was creating to hunt down these survivors, an organization of dark side users specifically trained to kill Jedi. The Inquisitorius was being formed, and its mission was simple: find every remaining Jedi in the galaxy and eliminate them, ensuring that the Great Jedi Purge would be complete. Birth of the Inquisitorious Emperor Palpatine understood that the initial execution of Order 66, devastating as it was, represented only the first phase of the Jedi's destruction. Clone troopers were effective soldiers, but they weren't Force-sensitive. They couldn't track Jedi who had gone into hiding using the Force to mask their presence. They couldn't match a Jedi in single combat if the Jedi had time to prepare and defend themselves. To hunt the survivors properly, Palpatine needed hunters who understood the Jedi's abilities and tactics, who could match them in the Force. The solution was both brilliant and terrible. The Empire would create the Inquisitorious, an organization of dark side users specifically trained to hunt Jedi, and the members of this organization would be recruited from the ranks of the Jedi themselves. During the chaos of Order 66 and the Temple attack, not every Jedi died. Some were captured, taken alive by clone troopers who recognized value in Force-sensitive prisoners. Others had already left the Jedi Order before the Purge, disillusioned with the Council's decisions or questioning the Order's role in the Clone Wars. These individuals, already separated from the Jedi's support structure and mentally vulnerable, became prime targets for corruption. Palpatine had been preparing for this even before Order 66 was executed. Throughout the Clone Wars, Sith agents within the Jedi Temple had identified Jedi who showed signs of doubt, anger, or disillusionment. These troubled Jedi received special attention. Their doubts were cultivated, their frustrations encouraged. When Order 66 came, these marked individuals weren't immediately killed by clone troopers. Instead, they received a different message. A hologram of Palpatine himself would appear before them. The Emperor would offer them a choice. They could die as traitors to the new Empire, or they could embrace a new path, join the Inquisitorious, help eliminate the Jedi who had failed the galaxy, serve the Emperor, and live. For Jedi who had been captured and subjected to torture, who watched their friends and masters die, who were broken by pain and fear, this offer seemed like salvation. For those who had already left the Order, who felt betrayed or abandoned, it represented validation of their decision. For those who had touched the dark side and felt its seductive power, it was permission to stop fighting their darker impulses. One of the first to join was a former Jedi Temple guard. His identity had been surrendered when he took up the mask and pike of the guard, but after witnessing the trial of Ahsoka Tano, after seeing the Jedi Council falsely accuse and abandon one of their own, his faith in the Order shattered. When Palpatine offered him power and purpose, he accepted. He became the Grand Inquisitor, leader of the dark side organization that would terrorize Force-sensitive individuals across the galaxy. Another early recruit was Trilla Suduri, formerly the Padawan of Serejunda.
Trilla had survived Order 66 and gone into hiding with her master and a group of younglings.
For a while they succeeded in staying hidden, but eventually the Empire found them. Ciri was captured and tortured, subjected to techniques designed to break even the strongest Jedi. Under that torture, she revealed Trilla's location. When Trilla was captured, she learned that her own master had betrayed her. The pain of that revelation, combined with her own torture, broke something fundamental inside her. The Empire offered her a chance for revenge, for power, for a purpose in the new galactic order. She became the second sister, one of the most effective and ruthless members of the Inquisitorious. The ninth sister, formerly a Jedi Knight named Masana Tide, was captured during the Purge and subjected to horrific torture. She was isolated, her connection to the Force probed and twisted, her mind broken and rebuilt according to Imperial specifications. The pain stripped away everything she had been, leaving only rage and loyalty to the Emperor. She lost a leg during her service to the Inquisitorius, killed by another Inquisitor in the organization's vicious internal competition, but she continued serving, driven by the dark side's consuming hunger. Iskata Karis, who had served as Padawan to Master Semberve, became the 13th sister. She had struggled throughout the Clone Wars with doubts about the Jedi Order's role as generals. Her uncertainty made her vulnerable to dark side manipulation even before Order 66. When the Purge came, when the Order she had served fell apart, she saw it as confirmation of her doubts. The Inquisitorius offered her clarity, certainty, and power. Not all Inquisitors were former Jedi. Some had been Force-sensitive individuals who never joined the Order, trained independently or by fallen Jedi, but the vast majority had worn the robes, had studied in the temple, had once been dedicated to the light side of the Force. Their fall represented another kind of victory for the Sith, a corruption of everything the Jedi stood for. Darth Vader personally oversaw the training of these Inquisitors. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The man who had led the assault on the Jedi Temple, who had murdered children and masters alike, now taught former Jedi how to hunt their surviving brothers and sisters. But Vader was uniquely qualified for this role. He understood how Jedi fought because he had been one of their finest warriors. He knew their weaknesses because he had overcome them himself through the dark side. The training was brutal and unforgiving. Vader's first lesson to the Inquisitors was about loss. He took a limb from each of them, using his lightsaber to sever an arm or leg. This served multiple purposes. It taught them that loss was part of the dark side's path. It ensured they were augmented with cybernetics, making them more dependent on Imperial technology. And it reminded them that they served at Vader's pleasure, that he could kill any of them at any moment if they displeased him. The Inquisitors were trained specifically in lightsaber combat and basic Force techniques. Vader taught them to abandon the defensive forms that the Jedi favored, to instead embrace aggressive, overwhelming attacks that leveraged the dark side's raw power. They learned to channel their anger, their pain, their hatred into their fighting styles. They were taught to use fear as a weapon, to project menace and terror that would demoralize opponents before the fighting even began. But critically, Vader and Palpatine deliberately limited the Inquisitors' training. They were taught enough to hunt surviving Jedi, but not enough to become threats to the Sith themselves. The deepest secrets of the dark side, the most powerful techniques, these were kept from the Inquisitors. They would never learn to create Force lightning. They would never master the Sith techniques of domination and corruption that Palpatine wielded. They were tools, weapons to be used and discarded, not potential successors. To emphasize their role as hunters rather than Sith, the Inquisitors were given titles instead of names. The Grand Inquisitor led the organization. Below him were numbered Inquisitors referred to as brother or sister. The second sister, third sister, fourth sister, fifth brother, sixth brother, seventh sister, eighth brother, ninth sister, 10th brother, 11th brother, and 13th sister. Each title was earned by killing their first Jedi, proving their worth as hunters. The Inquisitors were equipped with unique lightsabers designed specifically for their role. These weapons featured double-bladed designs similar to Darth Maul's iconic lightsaber, but with a critical modification. The circular emitter assembly could rotate at high speed, creating a deadly spinning blade that could overwhelm conventional defensive techniques. The spinning function was activated by a control ring on the hilt, transforming the lightsaber into a horrifying buzzsaw that could deflect multiple attacks simultaneously or create an impenetrable offensive assault. The red kyber crystals that powered these lightsabers had been harvested from fallen Jedi's weapons and pled through dark side rituals. The process of bleeding a crystal involved channeling dark side energy and negative emotions into the crystal until it succumbed to the darkness, its natural blue or green hue transforming into the crimson associated with the Sith. Each Inquisitor's lightsaber was thus powered by corrupted Jedi crystals, another symbol of the Order's fall and corruption. Beyond their combat training, the Inquisitors were taught investigative and tracking techniques. They studied Jedi philosophy to predict how survivors might behave. They learned to recognize Force-sensitive individuals who had never been trained. They developed networks of informants and spies across Imperial space. They became experts in psychological warfare, using captured Jedi's bodies or possessions as bait to lure other survivors into traps. The organization's structure encouraged competition and internal conflict. While the Grand Inquisitor commanded overall operations, individual Inquisitors competed viciously for Vader's favor and the Emperor's attention. They would sabotage each other's missions, steal credit for successful hunts, and occasionally even kill each other in the power struggles that defined life among the dark side servants. This constant conflict kept the Inquisitors focused on each other rather than challenging Vader or Palpatine. Their base of operations was Fortress Inquisitorius, a massive Imperial facility built on the water moon Nur in the Mustafar system. The fortress served multiple purposes. It housed the Inquisitors' training facilities, where new recruits were broken and rebuilt into dark side hunters. It contained interrogation chambers designed to torture information from captured Force sensitives. It held a vast archive of information about the Jedi Order, compiled from the Temple's records and from intelligence gathered across the galaxy. Most disturbingly, Fortress Inquisitorius contained a chamber of trophies. The bodies of Jedi killed by the Inquisitors were brought here and preserved in bacta tanks. This chamber served as both a reminder of the organization's success and a tool for psychological warfare. When Inquisitors captured surviving Jedi who refused to turn to the dark side, they would be brought to this chamber and shown the preserved corpses of their friends and masters, a demonstration of the futility of resistance. The Inquisitorius officially answered directly to Darth Vader, who in turn answered to the Emperor. But in practice, the organization often operated with significant autonomy. Individual Inquisitors could commandeer Imperial resources, override local military commanders, and pursue their targets across the galaxy with minimal oversight. This independence made them feared and resented by other branches of the Empire, but their direct connection to Vader meant few dared to interfere with their operations. The organization's primary mission was straightforward: locate surviving Jedi and either turn them to the dark side or eliminate them.
But as the years passed, their mission expanded.
The Emperor foresaw that Force-sensitive children would eventually be born, children who might one day pose a threat to the Empire. The Inquisitors were tasked with finding these children as part of Project Harvester, kidnapping them for training in Imperial facilities, or simply eliminating them to prevent future Jedi from emerging. By the time the Inquisitorius was fully operational, approximately 1 year after Order 66, the organization consisted of at least 12 active Inquisitors, all dedicated to the systematic elimination of the Jedi Order's remnants. They were supported by specialized clone troopers called Purge Troopers, elite squads trained specifically to assist in hunting Force sensitives. These Purge troopers wore distinctive black armor and were equipped with weapons designed to counter lightsaber combat, including electrostaffs and riot shields. The Inquisitorius represented Palpatine's long-term commitment to the destruction of the Jedi. Order 66 had killed thousands in a single day, but hunting the survivors required patience, resources, and specialized knowledge. The Inquisitors provided all three, ensuring that no Jedi could ever feel truly safe in the galaxy Palpatine now controlled. Vader's personal hunts while the Inquisitorius pursued Jedi survivors across the galaxy, Darth Vader conducted his own hunt. The Dark Lord personally targeted specific Jedi, particularly those who were especially powerful or who possessed knowledge that Palpatine wanted to exploit. These personal hunts served multiple purposes. They allowed Vader to refine his own dark side abilities. They eliminated potential threats before they could organize resistance. And they sent a message to any surviving Jedi that there was nowhere they could hide, that Vader couldn't reach them. One of Vader's first targets after his transformation was Jedi Master Kirak Infala. Infala was a powerful Jedi from the High Republic era who had taken the Barash Vow, a practice where a Jedi would cut themselves off from the Order and the galaxy to meditate on the Force and their failings. Infala had been living in isolation on the river moon of Aldolim for years when Vader found him. Palpatine directed Vader to Infala specifically because the Jedi Master possessed something the Sith Lord needed, a lightsaber. Vader's own weapon, the blue blade he had carried as Anakin Skywalker, had been taken by Obi-Wan Kenobi after their duel on Mustafar. To properly assume his role as a Sith Lord, Vader needed a red lightsaber, and Palpatine insisted that he claim one through conquest, killing a Jedi and bleeding their kyber crystal. The duel between Vader and Infila was brutal. Despite the Dark Lord's immense power, Infila was a master of lightsaber combat who had spent decades perfecting his technique in isolation. The Jedi Master fought using the rivers and waterfalls of his home as weapons, using the Force to manipulate water to create barriers and projectiles that challenged Vader's mechanical suit. During their first encounter, Infila actually defeated Vader, damaging his armor and sending the Dark Lord retreating. It was a humiliating loss that enraged Vader and pushed him to dig deeper into the dark side. When they fought again, Vader had devised a strategy specifically to counter Infila's techniques. The Dark Lord used his mechanical suit's strength to resist the Jedi's water-based attacks, then overwhelmed Infila with pure aggression and dark side power. After killing Infila, Vader took the Jedi Master's green lightsaber and performed the bleeding ritual. He channeled his pain, his rage, his hatred of what he had become into the kyber crystal. The crystal resisted, showing Vader visions of what he could have been, the life he could have led as Anakin Skywalker. But Vader crushed these visions, bent the crystal to his will through sheer force of dark side power. The crystal bled, turning from green to the crimson red that would become Vader's signature. Another high-priority target was Jocasta Nu, the former chief librarian of the Jedi Archives.
Nu had survived Order 66, and in the weeks following the Purge, had been working to preserve what knowledge she could.
She possessed a secret list of Force-sensitive children that had been compiled by the Jedi Order, a list that the Empire desperately wanted to acquire for Project Harvester. Nu returned to the Jedi Temple, using secret passages that only the librarians knew, attempting to retrieve the list and destroy the remaining archives before the Empire could use that knowledge. She successfully accessed the secret vault where the list was stored, but her presence was detected by Vader and the Grand Inquisitor. When confronted in the archives, Nu saw the Grand Inquisitor reading through precious Jedi texts and discarding them like trash. The sight of this former temple guard desecrating knowledge she had spent her life preserving sent her into a rage. She attacked the Grand Inquisitor, wielding her lightsaber with a fury that caught him off guard.
But she was an old woman, primarily a scholar rather than a warrior, and the Inquisitor quickly gained the upper hand.
Vader arrived during the confrontation and recognized the value of Nu's knowledge. He tried to take her alive, to extract information about other Jedi survivors and the location of Force-sensitive children. But Nu knew what capture would mean. She would be tortured, broken, forced to betray everyone she had sworn to protect. She chose defiance. In a final act of resistance, Nu destroyed the holocron containing the list of Force-sensitive children, ensuring the Empire couldn't use it. Vader, enraged by the loss of this intelligence, killed her without mercy. But before she died, Nu managed to transmit a warning to other Jedi, alerting them that the temple was compromised and that the Empire was specifically targeting Force-sensitive children. Her sacrifice saved countless children from Imperial kidnapping, though it cost her life and destroyed knowledge that could never be recovered.
Vader's hunt for Eth Koth represented a particularly personal mission.
Koth was a former member of the Jedi High Council who had left the Order before the Clone Wars ended. He had taken a wife and had a Force-sensitive daughter, living quietly on a remote world, trying to build a normal life away from the conflict. Koth believed that by leaving the Order, by renouncing his Jedi identity, he might be safe from the Purge. He was wrong. To Vader and Palpatine, anyone who had been a Jedi remained a threat. The Dark Lord dispatched several Inquisitors to Koth's location, including the 13th sister and the 5th brother. Their orders were to kill Koth's wife and kidnap his daughter for Project Harvester. When Koth realized what was happening, he chose to fight. He engaged Vader directly in a lightsaber duel, drawing on every technique he had mastered during his years on the High Council. For a while, Koth actually held his own against the Dark Lord, his desperation to protect his family driving him to perform beyond his normal capabilities. He came closer to defeating Vader than most Jedi had since the Dark Lord's transformation. But at a critical moment in their duel, the Inquisitors used Koth's infant daughter as a distraction.
When the former council member's attention wavered, when his focus shifted to his child being held hostage, Vader struck.
The Dark Lord's crimson blade pierced Koth's chest, ending the Jedi's life even as he watched his daughter being taken away. The hunt exemplified Vader's cruelty. He didn't just kill Jedi, he destroyed everything they loved, everything they tried to build outside the Order. The message was clear. There was no escape, no possibility of a peaceful life. Being a Jedi, or even having been a Jedi, was a death sentence. Throughout the years immediately following Order 66, Vader personally killed dozens of Jedi. Some were powerful warriors who required his direct intervention. Others were simply convenient targets who happened to cross his path. Each kill added to the Dark Lord's dark side power, each death feeding his connection to the Force's malevolent aspect. But Vader's most obsessive hunt was for a Jedi he couldn't find. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his former master, the man who had left him to burn on Mustafar, remained hidden somewhere in the galaxy. Vader sent probe droids to scour potential hiding places. He tortured captured Jedi, demanding to know Kenobi's location. He became obsessed with finding his old master, with continuing the duel they had begun on Mustafar. This obsession would consume Vader for years. He interrogated Jedi prisoners specifically about Kenobi. He investigated every rumor, every possible sighting. The Emperor eventually had to order Vader to stop wasting resources on this personal vendetta, to not let his past define him. But the obsession never truly ended. Even years later, when Vader finally encountered Kenobi again, the old wounds were as fresh as if their Mustafar duel had been yesterday. Vader's hunt for surviving Jedi extended beyond just the well-known masters. He pursued Padawans who had barely begun their training, archivists who posed no military threat, even younglings who had managed to escape the temple massacre. Each represented unfinished business, a loose thread that could unravel the Empire's narrative if left alive.
On Mon Cala, Vader personally hunted Padawan Farron Bar, who had been using his Force abilities to manipulate the local population into resisting Imperial occupation.
Bar had discovered information about the inhibitor chips and attempted to use this knowledge against the Empire. When Vader confronted him, Bar used the Force to activate Order 66 in nearby clone troopers, turning them against the Inquisitors accompanying Vader. The tactic was clever but ultimately futile. Vader killed Bar and eliminated the compromised troopers, erasing evidence of the conspiracy. The Dark Lord's methodical approach to hunting extended to investigating every rumor, every possible sighting of Jedi activity. When reports emerged of a Jedi gathering on the planet Kessel, Vader didn't dismiss it as unlikely or send Inquisitors to investigate. He went personally, suspecting a trap but willing to risk it for the chance to eliminate multiple targets simultaneously. What he found was indeed a trap, but not the kind he expected. Jedi Master Shadé Potkin had deliberately leaked information about the gathering, hoping to lure Vader to Kessel where 8 Jedi would be waiting to ambush him.
The plan had a fatal flaw.
Potkin had fallen to the dark side herself and intended to kill Vader, absorb his power, and claim his position as Palpatine's apprentice. The battle that followed demonstrated both Vader's combat prowess and the depths to which fallen Jedi could sink. Vader fought all 8 Jedi simultaneously in the ruins of an abandoned facility. They attacked from multiple angles, coordinating their strikes, using their knowledge of Vader's former identity as Anakin Skywalker to predict his moves. For a time, the Jedi actually gained the upper hand. One of them, Kafi Arana, wielded a Cortosis sword capable of shorting out lightsabers and managed to sever Vader's mechanical hand. But Potkin's betrayal turned the tide. She killed another Jedi, Baltar Swan, to claim her lightsaber, revealing her true allegiance to the dark side. The remaining Jedi were forced to fight on 2 fronts, against both Vader and Potkin. In the chaos, Vader used the Force to drive Potkin's own Cortosis sword through her chest, then turned the confusion to his advantage. He fought the remaining Jedi to a standstill until Imperial stormtroopers arrived and gunned them down. Vader returned to Coruscant with the story of the battle having grown in the telling. Reports claimed he had single-handedly defeated 50 Jedi in the Kessel encounter. The exaggeration served Imperial propaganda purposes, making Vader seem invincible and discouraging other Jedi from attempting organized resistance. But the truth was significant enough. Vader had faced 8 Jedi working together and survived, proving that even coordinated Jedi resistance could not overcome the Empire's enforcer. The Dark Lord's obsession with finding Obi-Wan Kenobi drove many of his actions during the early years of the Purge. He tortured, captured Jedi specifically to extract information about his former master's location. He investigated every desert world in the galaxy, believing Kenobi might hide in terrain similar to Tatooine. He even returned to Tatooine itself multiple times, though he never discovered Kenobi living in the Jundland wastes nearby. This obsession revealed a vulnerability in Vader's otherwise efficient approach to hunting. He spent resources pursuing leads that went nowhere. He allowed emotion to guide decisions that should have been tactical.
Emperor Palpatine eventually ordered Vader to abandon the hunt for Kenobi, recognizing that the fixation was becoming counterproductive.
But Vader never truly let go of his desire to finish what had begun on Mustafar. When the two finally met again approximately 9 years after Order 66, their duel demonstrated how much both had changed. Kenobi was older, worn down by isolation and guilt, but also more centered in the Force than he had been during the Clone Wars. Vader was more powerful in raw strength, but trapped by his armor and his pain. Their confrontation on a barren world allowed Kenobi to finally understand that Anakin Skywalker was truly gone, consumed entirely by Darth Vader. This realization allowed him to let go of his guilt and accept what his former apprentice had become. The encounter ended without a clear victor. Vader defeated Kenobi in combat but failed to kill him, as Kenobi escaped with help from allies. This pattern would repeat itself across Vader's hunts. He was devastatingly effective against individual Jedi or small groups, but when survivors worked together, when they had support from non-Force sensitive allies, they could sometimes escape even his relentless pursuit. Vader's personal hunts continued for years after Order 66, representing some of the most dangerous threats any surviving Jedi faced. While Inquisitors might be overcome by a skilled Jedi, while clone troopers could be evaded or defeated, Vader was in a class entirely his own. He was one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history, enhanced by cybernetics, driven by pain and hatred, and equipped with fighting skills honed across decades of warfare. His techniques for hunting evolved over time. Initially, he relied on brute force and intimidation, overwhelming targets with raw power. But as surviving Jedi became more elusive, Vader developed more sophisticated methods. He studied intelligence reports, analyzed patterns of Force-sensitive activity, and predicted where Jedi might hide based on their psychological profiles and training. He learned to mask his Force presence, allowing him to approach targets undetected. He developed techniques for sensing Force users across vast distances, tracking them through the Force like a predator following a scent. The Dark Lord also employed psychological warfare against his targets. He would leave bodies of killed Jedi displayed publicly, not just as warnings, but as messages to specific survivors. He preserved recordings of interrogations, broadcasting them on frequencies he knew surviving Jedi monitored, forcing them to hear their comrades' final moments. He used the Jedi's own compassion against them, knowing they would risk exposure to save innocents, then ambushing them when they tried to help. One particularly brutal hunt targeted a group of Jedi hiding on Anoat. 4 Jedi, Kandra, Mususiel, Nuhuj, and Zubain Ankanori, had survived Order 66 and established a small community in Anoat's remote regions.
They weren't fighting the Empire, weren't training new Force users, weren't doing anything except trying to live quietly.
The Inquisitorius discovered them anyway and sent multiple Inquisitors to eliminate the threat. The battle was short and brutal. The 4 Jedi fought together, their coordination born from years of surviving together, but they were overwhelmed by the Inquisitors' numbers and dark side power. All 4 were killed, their community destroyed, their attempt at peaceful survival ended violently. The massacre demonstrated that there was no safe path for Jedi, no possibility of living quietly and being left alone. The Empire would find them eventually, and when it did, mercy was not an option. To encounter Vader was, for most Jedi, to die. The few who survived such meetings did so through luck, through the intervention of others, or through Vader's own decision to let them live for purposes of his own. The Dark Lord became a legend among surviving Jedi, a nightmare figure whispered about in the hidden communities that tried to preserve what little remained of the Order. Vader himself seemed to view the hunt as both duty and penance. He was fulfilling the Emperor's commands, yes, but he was also destroying every reminder of who he had been. Each Jedi he killed was a link to Anakin Skywalker severed, a connection to his past self eliminated. By the time the hunt ended, by the time Vader faced Luke Skywalker and saw what he could have been in his son's determination and compassion, the Dark Lord had spent nearly 2 decades trying to murder the memory of the man he used to be. The hunt would continue for years, with Vader personally accounting for a significant portion of the Jedi deaths during the Great Jedi Purge. His shadow fell across the entire galaxy, a constant reminder that the Empire's power was absolute, that the Jedi's time was over, that resistance was futile. The fear he inspired was as effective a weapon as his lightsaber, keeping surviving Jedi in hiding, preventing them from organizing, ensuring the Order could never rebuild while the Empire stood. While Vader conducted high-profile hunts against powerful Jedi Masters, the Inquisitors pursued a systematic campaign to eliminate every Force-sensitive individual they could find. Their methods were efficient, brutal, and designed to inspire terror. Each Inquisitor had their own hunting style, their own techniques for tracking prey and breaking resistance. The Grand Inquisitor led by example, conducting operations across Imperial space with cold precision.
As a former Jedi Temple guard, he knew the Order's protocols intimately.
He understood how Jedi thought, how they might choose hiding places, what kinds of cover identities they might adopt. This insider knowledge made him devastatingly effective. His most significant campaign targeted the planet Luthal, where he tracked a former Padawan named Kanan Jarrus, who had been leading a small rebel cell. Kanan had survived Order 66 as a teenager, when his master, Depa Bilaba, sacrificed herself to allow him to escape. He had spent years living as a smuggler and drifter, hiding his Force abilities, trying to forget he had ever been a Jedi. But when Kanan encountered a Force-sensitive street orphan named Ezra Bridger, something changed. He began training the boy, passing on what little Jedi knowledge he could remember from his truncated Padawan days. This act of teaching, of preserving the Jedi tradition even in the smallest way, drew the Grand Inquisitor's attention like blood in water draws a predator. The Inquisitor's pursuit of Kanan and Ezra became a cat-and-mouse game that lasted for months. The dark side hunter demonstrated powers and techniques that far exceeded what Kanan could match. He could read minds, predict movements, and wielded his double-bladed spinning lightsaber with terrifying efficiency. Time and again the Inquisitor cornered his prey, only for them to escape through luck or the intervention of their rebel allies. The campaign culminated aboard an Imperial Star Destroyer, where the Grand Inquisitor believed he had finally trapped Kanan and Ezra without possibility of escape. In a duel above the ship's reactor core, the Inquisitor disarmed Kanan and prepared to execute both the Jedi and his apprentice. But Ezra's apparent death galvanized Kanan, stripping away his fear and doubt, allowing him to tap into the Force more deeply than he had since his master's death. In that moment of clarity, Kanan became what he had been training to be all those years ago before Order 66 interrupted his path. He fought with confidence and precision, destroying the Grand Inquisitor's lightsaber and sending him tumbling toward the reactor's energy core. The Inquisitor clung to a piece of wreckage, but his fear of Vader's punishment for failure exceeded his fear of death. He chose to let go, falling into the reactor and ending his hunt permanently. The Grand Inquisitor's death sent shockwaves through the Inquisitorius. For years he had been the organization's most successful hunter. His failure and death suggested that the Jedi weren't as beaten as the Empire claimed, that resistance was possible. More critically, it left a power vacuum within the organization that the remaining Inquisitors rushed to fill. The second sister Trilla Siduri was among the Inquisitorius' most effective hunters after the Grand Inquisitor's death. Her intimate knowledge of how Jedi in hiding operated, combined with her personal vendetta against her former master Sera Junda, made her relentless. Trilla specifically targeted Padawan Cal Kestis, who had survived Order 66 and hidden on the junkyard planet of Bracca for 5 years. Cal had been working as a scrapper, deliberately suppressing his Force abilities, trying to live an anonymous life. But when he used the Force to save a friend, his cover was blown. The second sister pursued him across the galaxy, From Bracca to Bogano to Zepho to Kashyyyk, always one step behind but never quite catching him. Trilla's hunt demonstrated the Inquisitors' investigative capabilities. She tracked Cal through informant networks, through analyzing his pattern of movements, through predicting which Jedi sites he might visit in his quest to rebuild the Order. She employed psychological warfare, using her knowledge of Jedi training to anticipate Cal's decisions and set traps accordingly. Their final confrontation came at Fortress Inquisitorius itself, where Cal had infiltrated to rescue captives and secure a Jedi holocron containing the locations of Force-sensitive children. Trilla engaged him in the fortress's underwater sections, her fighting style aggressive and overwhelming. But Cal had grown stronger throughout his journey, trained by Ciri and by the challenges he had overcome. During their duel, Ciri arrived and revealed the truth about Trilla's fall. She had been tortured, yes, but more critically, she had been betrayed by Ciri's confession under torture. The revelation shook something in Trilla, reminding her of who she had been before the dark side consumed her. For a moment, the second sister wavered, and Ciri seized that moment to apologize, to take responsibility for her failure as a master. That moment of redemption was cut short when Darth Vader arrived. He saw Trilla's hesitation, her momentary return toward the light, as unforgivable weakness. Before she could fully turn back to the light side, Vader's crimson blade pierced her chest. She died in Ciri's arms, her last words a warning about Vader's power and a quiet expression of gratitude that she had been freed from the dark side, even if only for a moment. The ninth sister, Masana Tide, conducted her hunts with brutal efficiency. Having lost her leg during her service to the Inquisitorius, replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic, she channeled pain and rage into overwhelming physical power. She was particularly skilled at reading emotions through the Force, using people's fears and doubts against them. Her pursuit of Cal Kestis on Kashyyyk demonstrated her combat prowess. She fought using raw strength, her heavy attacks shattering Cal's defenses and pushing him to his limits. But Cal ultimately defeated her by using the environment against her, causing her to fall from a great height. The Inquisitors survived that encounter, driven by her desire for revenge. Years later, in 9 years before the Battle of Yavin, the ninth sister tracked Cal to Coruscant. She had become even more consumed by the dark side, her obsession with proving her worth to Vader driving her to reckless aggression. She attacked Cal in the open, in a public space filled with civilians, caring nothing for collateral damage. Cal tried to turn her back to the light, speaking to the Jedi Knight she had once been. But Masana Tide was gone, consumed completely by the ninth sister's dark identity. When she refused redemption, when she declared that the Jedi she had been was dead, Cal reluctantly killed her in self-defense. Her death marked another Inquisitor eliminated, another tool of the Empire broken. The seventh sister and fifth brother often worked as a team, their complementary styles making them effective at cornering prey. The seventh sister was cunning and patient, using ID-9 seeker droids to track targets and employing subtle manipulation to isolate victims from their allies. The fifth brother was direct and brutal, relying on raw power and intimidation. They pursued Kanan Jarrus and his rebel cell to the ancient Sith temple on Malachor, where they encountered not only the Jedi they were hunting, but also Darth Maul, the former Sith Lord who had his own agenda. The ruins of Malachor became a battleground where Jedi, Sith, and Inquisitors clashed in a complex three-way conflict. The fifth brother and seventh sister made the critical mistake of underestimating Maul. The ancient Sith Lord, despite being outnumbered, demonstrated fighting skills that far exceeded the Inquisitor's training. He killed the fifth brother with contemptuous ease, his crimson blade severing the Inquisitor's torso in a single strike. He then killed the seventh sister with similar efficiency, proving that the Inquisitors, for all their dark side power, were mere apprentices compared to a true Sith Lord. The eighth brother met his end on that same day at that same temple. After his fellow Inquisitors fell to mold, he attempted to flee using his lightsaber's spinning function as an aerial device. But Kain Jarrus damaged the weapon during their fight, causing it to malfunction. The eighth brother fell from a great height when his damaged lightsaber exploded, crashing into the temple's courtyard. These deaths on Malachor represented a turning point in the Great Jedi Purge. 3 Inquisitors killed in a single day, their bodies left in the ruins of an ancient Sith temple. The loss diminished the Inquisitorius significantly, reducing the number of active hunters and demonstrating that the organization wasn't invincible. The Six Brothers' hunt ended even more ignominiously. Assigned to track Ahsoka Tano to a farming village, he killed civilians indiscriminately to draw out the former Jedi. When Ahsoka finally confronted him, the sixth brother discovered that he was woefully outmatched. Ahsoka had been trained personally by Anakin Skywalker during his prime. She had fought in the Clone Wars against the galaxy's deadliest warriors. She had survived encounters with General Grievous and Count Dooku. The sixth brother lasted mere minutes. Ahsoka not only killed him but also took his red lightsaber crystals and purified them through the Force, turning them white. These purified crystals became the power source for her new lightsabers, transforming weapons of darkness into instruments of light. Her victory sent another message to surviving Jedi. The Inquisitors could be beaten. Their dark side power turned against them. The 10th brother, formerly a Jedi master named Proset Dibbs, who had objected to the Jedi becoming warriors during the Clone Wars, met perhaps the most ironic death of all the Inquisitors. On the ocean world of Mon Cala, he led a squad of purge troopers against a former Padawan named Ferren Barr. The Padawan used the Force to manipulate the clone troopers' minds, convincing them that the Inquisitors were Jedi and that Order 66 should be executed against them. The purge troopers, their inhibitor chip still active, turned on the 10th brother without hesitation. He died at the hands of clone troopers killed by the very protocol that had destroyed the Jedi Order he had once served. The irony was not lost on observers. A former Jedi who became an Inquisitor, killed by Order 66, the same command that had killed his former comrades. As the years passed and Inquisitor after Inquisitor fell, the organization's effectiveness diminished. By 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, when the Great Jedi Purge officially ended at the Battle of Malachor, most of the original Inquisitors were dead. The few who survived either continued serving in diminished roles or disappeared into obscurity. The Inquisitorius had been designed as a temporary solution, a specialized unit to handle the immediate aftermath of Order 66. As surviving Jedi became increasingly rare, as Force-sensitive children were either captured or went into deep hiding, the organization's usefulness waned. The Empire had other priorities, other threats to address. The Rebel Alliance was growing stronger. The Death Star's construction demanded resources. The systematic hunting of the last few Jedi became less critical compared to these larger strategic concerns. What happened to the surviving Inquisitors after the organization was disbanded remains partially mysterious. Some were likely killed by Vader, who had a history of eliminating subordinates who outlived their usefulness. Others may have been reassigned to different Imperial roles or simply vanished into the galaxy's dark corners. The third sister, Reva Sevender, was one of the few confirmed to have survived and returned to the light side of the Force, though her ultimate fate remained unknown. The Inquisitors' campaigns, brutal and effective as they were, ultimately represented only one aspect of the Great Jedi Purge. They accounted for perhaps dozens of Jedi deaths. a significant number but nowhere near the thousands killed during Order 66 itself. Their true impact was psychological. They ensured that no Jedi could ever feel safe, that using the Force or wielding a lightsaber in public meant certain death, that the Empire's reach extended everywhere. Survivors in hiding despite the Empire's best efforts, despite Order 66 and the Inquisitorius and Vader's personal hunts, Jedi survived. Scattered across the galaxy, hidden in remote locations, or disguised among ordinary citizens, these survivors represented the last flames of the light side in an increasingly dark galaxy. Cal Kestis spent 5 years on Bracca before his Force abilities were exposed. Those years taught him valuable lessons about survival. He learned to suppress his connection to the Force, to ignore the whispers of the living energy that had once guided his every action. He learned to blend in among non-Force-sensitive workers, to avoid drawing attention, to bury his past so deeply that sometimes he almost believed he was just another scrapper. But suppressing the Force came at a cost. Cal suffered from psychological trauma, experiencing disconnection from the living Force that manifested as literal gaps in his memory and abilities. When he finally embraced his Jedi identity again, he had to relearn techniques that should have been instinctive, had to rebuild his connection to the Force piece by piece. Cal's journey took him across the galaxy in search of a Jedi holocron that contained the locations of Force-sensitive children. He believed that finding these children and training them could rebuild the Jedi Order, but along the way, he learned difficult truths about the cost of resistance, about the danger of trying to restore what had been lost. His quest brought him into contact with other survivors. Serejunda, his mentor, carried her own trauma from surviving the Purge. She had cut herself off from the Force entirely after her failure to protect Trilla, believing she no longer deserved to wield Jedi powers. Taran Malicos, a former Jedi general who had survived Order 66, had fallen to the dark side on Dathomar, becoming a tyrant ruling over the Night Brothers. These encounters taught Cal that survival wasn't enough. What mattered was what you chose to do with that survival, what kind of person you became in the face of overwhelming darkness.
When he finally recovered the holocron, Cal made a choice that defined his character.
He destroyed it, choosing to let Force-sensitive children live their lives in peace, rather than risk painting targets on them by recruiting them to a broken order. Kanan Jarrus, born Caleb Doom, had survived as a teenager when his master fell during Order 66. Clone Force 99, a squad of experimental clones whose mutations allowed them to resist their inhibitor chips, helped him escape. But that escape came at a cost. Kanan spent years trying to forget he had been a Jedi, suppressing his training, living as a smuggler and mercenary. When he finally chose to embrace his Jedi identity again and train Ezra Bridger, Kanan faced challenges he wasn't prepared for. His training had been incomplete when Order 66 interrupted it. He didn't know advanced techniques that a fully trained knight would have mastered. He had to learn alongside his apprentice, rediscovering Jedi teachings through trial and error. Kanan's story demonstrated both the resilience and the limitations of surviving Jedi. He was brave, resourceful, and deeply committed to fighting the Empire. But he also carried trauma that affected his judgment, feared attachments even as he formed them, and struggled with imposter syndrome about whether he deserved to call himself a Jedi at all. His greatest act came during a mission to Lothal, where he sacrificed himself to save his friends from an explosion. Kanan gave his life protecting the people he loved, embodying the Jedi ideal of selfless service, even though he had spent most of his adult life running from that identity. His death inspired others to continue the fight against the Empire, creating ripples that would eventually contribute to the Rebel Alliance's formation. Ahsoka Tano occupied a unique position among survivors. She had left the Jedi Order before the Purge, disillusioned by the Council's handling of her trial for treason. This meant she wasn't technically a Jedi when Order 66 was executed, though the protocol made no such distinction. Her survival alongside Captain Rex gave her a perspective few others possessed. She knew about the inhibitor chips, understood the mechanism of betrayal. For years, Ahsoka worked behind the scenes, helping establish the Rebel Alliance, providing intelligence and support to resistance cells. She used the codename Fulcrum, hiding her identity even from most of the rebels she assisted. This secrecy was necessary. If the Empire learned that Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan had survived, if Vader knew his little sister was alive and fighting against him, she would become a primary target. That confrontation finally came on Malachor, where Ahsoka encountered Vader among the ruins of an ancient Sith temple. Their duel was emotionally devastating. Ahsoka had suspected Vader's identity but hadn't wanted to believe it. When Vader's mask was damaged and she heard Anakin's voice beneath the mechanical breathing, when she saw his scarred face, the last of her denial shattered. She couldn't kill him, despite everything he had done, despite the thousands of Jedi he had murdered. He had been her teacher, her brother in all but blood. She chose to stay behind on Malachor, to hold Vader off while her allies escaped, knowing it likely meant her death. Her assumed death allowed the Great Jedi Purge to officially end, as the Empire believed the last significant Jedi had been eliminated. Obi-Wan Kenobi spent 19 years in exile on Tatooine, watching over Luke Skywalker from a distance. Those years tested him in ways that combat never had. He lived alone in the desert, cut off from other Jedi, unable to use his powers openly, forced to watch the Empire's tyranny spread without taking action. The isolation wore on him. He questioned his choices, wondered if hiding was cowardice, struggled with survivor's guilt over the Jedi who had died while he lived. Approximately 9 years into his exile, Kenobi was forced out of hiding when Bail Organa's daughter Leia was kidnapped.
The former Jedi Master returned to active service, confronting Inquisitors and ultimately facing Vader again.
Their rematch on a barren world allowed Kenobi to see what his former apprentice had truly become. The man he had known was gone, consumed by the dark side. That realization allowed Kenobi to finally let go of his guilt over leaving Vader to die on Mustafar. Grand Master Yoda's exile on Dagobah was similarly isolating. The swamp world was saturated with dark side energy from an ancient evil that had been defeated there centuries ago. This dark side presence masked Yoda's Force signature from any Sith who might search for him, but it also meant living in constant proximity to corruption. Yoda spent his exile meditating, communing with the Force, preparing for a future he sensed was coming but couldn't clearly see. Other survivors adapted in different ways. Quinlan Voss, a Jedi Master known for his skill in psychometry and his flirtation with the dark side, dedicated himself to helping other Force sensitives escape Imperial persecution. He worked with an underground network called The Path, which smuggled Force-sensitive individuals to safety. His name appeared on walls and in hidden messages across the galaxy, a beacon of hope for those trying to escape the Inquisitors. Some Jedi survived by abandoning their identities entirely. They destroyed their lightsabers, burned their robes, and used the Force only in the most dire circumstances. They took mundane jobs on forgotten worlds, raised families, and tried to forget they had ever been guardians of peace and justice. These survivors weren't cowards. They had simply chosen to preserve their lives in the hope that someday, when the Empire fell, the Jedi tradition could be restored. A Jedi named Grandia demonstrated perhaps the most ingenious survival technique. She specialized in mind tricks, a power many Jedi dismissed as undignified. When Order 66 came, she simply convinced the clone troopers that she wasn't a Jedi. Later, when Inquisitors hunted her, she convinced them they had killed her, making her mind trick so powerful that they reported her death to Vader with complete certainty. She survived for decades using this technique, living openly but invisible to the Empire's hunters through sheer force of mental manipulation. The youngest survivor, Grogu, represented hope for the future. The small child, a member of the same species as Yoda, had been rescued from the Jedi Temple by Jedi Master Kelleran Baku. For decades, Grogu's location remained unknown, his caretakers keeping him hidden from the Empire. When he finally emerged, he demonstrated both Jedi abilities and a childlike innocence that suggested the Order's teachings could survive in a new generation. These survivors, each dealing with their trauma and isolation in their own way, represented the resilience of the Force and the Jedi philosophy. They weren't all heroes. Some made questionable decisions, compromised their principles, or simply tried to survive by any means necessary. But they endured. They kept the light side alive during the galaxy's darkest period. They ensured that when the time came to resist the Empire, when the Rebel Alliance needed Force users to help them fight, there would be Jedi to answer that call. The Path and underground networks, as surviving Jedi, struggled to adapt to life under the Empire. Networks emerged to help Force-sensitive individuals escape persecution. These underground organizations operated in secrecy, moving refugees along hidden routes, providing false identities, and creating safe houses on remote worlds where Force users could hide from Imperial attention.
The Path was the largest and most successful of these networks.
Founded by Force-sensitive individuals and sympathetic non-Force users, the Path operated throughout the Outer Rim and beyond, smuggling people who possessed Force abilities to safety. They established safe houses on dozens of worlds, creating a network that stretched across the galaxy like invisible threads, connecting isolated points of light. Quinlan Vos became one of the Path's most important operators. The Jedi Master had survived Order 66 through a combination of skill, luck, and his deep knowledge of the galactic underworld. Vos had always been something of a maverick within the Jedi Order, willing to work with criminals and dark side users if it served the greater good.
These connections proved invaluable when establishing the Path's routes and safe houses.
Vos worked tirelessly, moving from world to world, identifying Force-sensitive individuals before the Inquisitors could find them. He would make contact through intermediaries, arrange transportation, and shepherd refugees along routes that avoided Imperial patrols and Inquisitor operations. His psychometric abilities allowed him to read objects and locations, detecting whether safe houses had been compromised or if refugees were being tracked. The Path's operations required extensive coordination. Each segment of the route was known only to the operators responsible for that section. Refugees would be handed off from one guide to another, never knowing the full route or the identities of everyone involved. This compartmentalization meant that if one section was compromised, the entire network wouldn't collapse. Safe houses were established on worlds the Empire considered insignificant. Agricultural planets, mining colonies, remote research stations, anywhere that lacked significant Imperial presence became potential refuges. Some safe houses were hidden in plain sight, concealed within normal communities where Force-sensitive individuals could blend in as long as they didn't use their abilities openly. Others were isolated compounds in wilderness areas, protected by sensor jammers and defensive systems. The Path also worked to provide Force-sensitive children with new identities. Birth records were falsified. Families were created through adoption or fostering arrangements. Children who might have been trained as Jedi in a different era instead grew up as moisture farmers, traders, mechanics, or any of 1,000 other professions, their abilities hidden, their potential unrealized, but at least alive. Tala Durith, an Imperial officer who had become disillusioned with the Empire after witnessing Jedi younglings being killed, used her position to aid the path. She operated within the Imperial system, using her clearances to monitor Inquisitor movements, to warn of incoming raids, to create false records that led hunters away from refugees. Her double life was incredibly dangerous. Discovery would mean execution, not just for her, but for everyone she had helped. Other networks operated independently of the path, but toward similar goals. On certain worlds, local populations protected Force-sensitive individuals out of loyalty to the Jedi Order or simple decency. The Wookiees of Kashyyyk, who had fought alongside Jedi during the Clone Wars, helped hide Jedi refugees in their forests. Certain Mandalorian clans, though many had complicated relationships with the Jedi, still respected warriors who fought with honor and offered shelter to those fleeing persecution. These networks saved hundreds, possibly thousands of Force-sensitive lives during the years of the Great Jedi Purge. They couldn't save everyone. Many refugees were caught during transfer, killed by Inquisitors or captured by Imperial forces. Safe houses were discovered and raided. Operators were arrested, tortured for information, then executed. The work was dangerous, costly, and often heartbreaking. But it was also necessary. Each person saved represented not just a life preserved, but a possibility maintained. Each child hidden safely away was a potential future Jedi who might help rebuild the Order when the time came. Each adult Force user who survived to join the rebellion brought unique abilities and knowledge that made the fight against the Empire more viable. The path's existence also served a psychological purpose. It demonstrated that resistance was possible, that the Empire hadn't crushed all opposition, that people still chose compassion over collaboration. For Jedi in hiding, knowing the path existed provided hope. They weren't alone. Networks were working to protect people like them. Help was available for those who needed it. Obi-Wan Kenobi encountered the path during his mission to rescue Leia Organa. The network had established operations on various worlds, and Kenobi found evidence of their work in the form of symbols and messages left for Force sensitives seeking assistance. Quinlan Voss's name appeared in these networks, confirming to Kenobi that his old friend had survived and was continuing to fight in his own way. For refugees who successfully navigated the path to safety, life remained difficult but at least possible. They lived under assumed identities, careful never to use Force abilities that might draw attention. They established new lives, found work, perhaps even started families. But they never forgot what they were or what they had lost. They carried their Jedi training with them like a secret treasure, hoping that someday conditions would allow them to practice openly again. As the Rebel Alliance grew stronger, some of these hidden Force users emerged from hiding to join the fight. They brought skills and knowledge that proved invaluable in the war against the Empire. They served as advisors, as special operatives, as teachers for those few younglings who had survived and were ready to begin training. They represented the bridge between the old Jedi Order and whatever new form the Order might take in the future. The path and similar networks demonstrated that even in the darkest times, compassion and resistance could survive. The Empire controlled armies, commanded vast resources, and wielded terrifying weapons. But they couldn't eliminate the fundamental human impulse to help others, to protect the vulnerable, to resist tyranny regardless of personal cost. These networks kept that impulse alive, ensuring that when the Empire finally fell, the foundations existed to rebuild what had been lost. The end of the Purge. The Great Jedi Purge, which had begun in 19 years before the Battle of Yavin with Order 66, officially ended in 3 years before the Battle of Yavin at the ancient Sith temple on Malachor. The end came not with a grand declaration or final victory, but with a series of events that made continuing the systematic hunt for Jedi impractical and unnecessary. The Battle of Malachor saw 3 Inquisitors killed in a single day. The 5th brother, 7th sister, and 8th brother all fell, reducing the Inquisitorius' active membership significantly. More critically, the battle demonstrated that surviving Jedi could defeat Inquisitors, that the dark side hunters weren't invincible. Ahsoka Tano's confrontation with Darth Vader at Malachor became a pivotal moment. When Ahsoka stayed behind to hold off Vader while her allies escaped, when the temple collapsed around them, the Empire believed she had died. Vader reported her death to the Emperor, though he may have had doubts about whether she truly perished in the ruins.
With Ahsoka's apparent death, the Empire lost track of the last high-profile Jedi survivor they knew about.
Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda remained hidden, their locations unknown. Other survivors had successfully disappeared into the galaxy's vastness. The Inquisitors had been depleted by years of casualties. The cost of continuing the purge began to outweigh the benefits. Emperor Palpatine made a pragmatic decision. While he ordered that any Jedi encountered should still be killed on sight, he stopped dedicating significant resources to actively hunting them. The Death Star's construction required immense funding and personnel. The Rebel Alliance was becoming a more pressing threat than a handful of scattered Force users. The Empire's priorities shifted from eliminating the Jedi to maintaining control over an increasingly restless galaxy. The Inquisitorius was gradually disbanded. Some Inquisitors were killed in action, others were eliminated by Vader when they became liabilities. A few simply vanished, possibly executed as part of a purge of the Purgers, the Empire eliminating loose ends who knew too much about its early crimes. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, the organization that had terrorized Force sensitives for over 15 years essentially no longer existed. This didn't mean Jedi were safe. Vader continued to hunt them when opportunities arose. Local Imperial governors sometimes ordered the execution of suspected Force users. Bounty hunters still collected on Jedi bounties posted years earlier. But the systematic galaxy-wide campaign to eliminate every last Jedi had ended. Those who had survived this long, who had evaded capture through luck and skill and the assistance of allies, were likely to remain alive unless they drew specific attention. The statistics of the Great Jedi Purge paint a grim picture. The Jedi Order at the start of the Clone Wars numbered approximately 10,000 members. After Order 66 and the subsequent years of hunting, fewer than 100 are confirmed to have survived to the founding of the rebellion. Thousands were killed on the first day alone. Hundreds more fell to the Inquisitors, to Vader's personal hunts, to bounty hunters and Imperial forces over the following years. The destruction extended beyond just the people. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was converted into the Imperial Palace, its sacred halls defiled by the Emperor's presence. Jedi temples on other worlds were demolished or repurposed. The archives containing over 100,000 years of accumulated wisdom were destroyed or seized for Palpatine's private study. Holocrons created by ancient masters were smashed or corrupted for dark side research. Artifacts of tremendous historical and spiritual significance were lost forever. The Purge also succeeded in erasing the Jedi from galactic consciousness remarkably quickly. Within a generation, children grew up who had never seen a Jedi. The Force became mythology, something people spoke of in hushed tones as a hokey religion rather than a real phenomenon. Han Solo, who would later become crucial to the rebellion's success, famously dismissed the Force as superstition, despite having grown up during the Clone Wars when Jedi served openly as generals. This erasure from cultural memory was perhaps Palpatine's greatest success. He didn't just kill the Jedi, he made the galaxy forget what they had represented. Without that cultural memory, without the understanding of what the Jedi had protected and stood for, resistance to the Empire lacked a moral foundation that could unite diverse peoples. The Emperor had removed not just the Guardians but the very concept of guardianship, yet the Purge also planted the seeds of its own eventual failure. The surviving Jedi became symbols of resistance, proof that the Empire wasn't invincible. Their stories inspired others to fight back. When Luke Skywalker emerged as a Force user, when he sought training from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, he represented the hope that the Jedi tradition could be restored. His journey from farm boy to Jedi Knight demonstrated that even the Empire's most successful genocide couldn't permanently eliminate what the Force chose to preserve. The Great Jedi Purge ended in 3 years before Yavin, but its effects would shape galactic history for decades. The trauma inflicted on Force-sensitive individuals created generations who feared their own abilities, who hid rather than embraced their potential. The loss of Jedi knowledge set back understanding of the Force by thousands of years. The precedent it established that Force users could be systematically targeted and eliminated would influence how future governments treated those with unusual abilities. The legacy and impact, the Great Jedi Purge changed the galaxy in ways that extended far beyond the simple elimination of the Jedi Order. It fundamentally altered how Force users were perceived, how power was wielded, and what resistance to tyranny might look like. For surviving Jedi, the Purge created lasting psychological trauma. Cal Kestis experienced dissociation from the Force and memory gaps. Kanan Jarrus struggled with fear and doubt about his worthiness to train an apprentice. Sera Junda cut herself off from the Force entirely, believing she had failed so catastrophically that she didn't deserve its power. These weren't simple injuries that could be healed with time. They were fundamental wounds to identity, to purpose, to the connection with the Force that defined a Jedi's existence. The trauma also affected how survivors trained the next generation. When Luke Skywalker sought Jedi training, both Obi-Wan and Yoda were cautious to the point of paranoia about his potential fall to the dark side. Their experiences with Anakin's betrayal colored every decision they made about Luke's training. They withheld information, tested him perhaps more harshly than necessary, and nearly abandoned his training entirely when he chose to leave Dagobah to save his friends. This broken transmission of knowledge meant that Luke's understanding of the Jedi tradition was incomplete. He learned lightsaber combat and Force techniques, but he missed the broader philosophical framework, the community aspect of the Order, the centuries of accumulated wisdom about avoiding the dark side's pitfalls. When Luke later attempted to rebuild the Jedi Order, these gaps in his knowledge would contribute to failures that allowed his nephew Ben Solo to fall to the dark side. For the galaxy at large, the Purge demonstrated that ancient institutions could fall, that traditions lasting thousands of years could be destroyed in a single generation.
This realization affected how people viewed the Empire.
If the Jedi Order could be eliminated, what couldn't the Empire destroy? The psychological impact of this message cannot be overstated. It created a climate of fear and resignation that made organizing resistance incredibly difficult.
Yet, paradoxically, the Purge also created martyrs.
Jedi who died fighting the Empire, who sacrificed themselves to save others, who refused to surrender their principles even under torture, these individuals became legendary. Their stories spread through underground networks, through whispered conversations, through the persistent cultural memory that even imperial propaganda couldn't completely erase. They represented proof that heroism was possible, that the Empire could be defied. The Purge's success also revealed a critical weakness in the Sith's philosophy. By eliminating all potential threats so thoroughly, Palpatine and Vader created a vacuum. When Force users finally did emerge to oppose them, the Sith had lost the institutional knowledge to properly respond.
They had spent decades fighting a defeated enemy, hunting scattered survivors who posed minimal threat.
They weren't prepared for organized resistance from trained Force users when it finally materialized. The Death Star, the Empire's ultimate weapon, was in many ways a product of the Purge's logic. Having eliminated the Jedi through systematic violence, Palpatine applied the same principle to planetary populations. If fear of Force users had helped control the population, fear of the Death Star would do so even more effectively. The weapon represented the logical endpoint of the Purge's philosophy. Ultimate power exercised without restraint, terror as a tool of governance. But just as the Purge couldn't eliminate all Jedi, the Death Star couldn't crush all resistance. The weapon's destruction at the Battle of Yavin demonstrated the same truth. Tyranny, no matter how absolute it appears, contains the seeds of its own destruction. Overreach creates the very resistance it seeks to prevent. Fear eventually transforms into anger, then into action. For Force-sensitive children born during the Imperial era, the Purge's legacy meant a childhood without guidance. They experienced strange abilities, visions, enhanced reflexes, but had no framework to understand what they were experiencing. Some went mad from the confusion. Others suppressed their abilities so deeply they forgot they had them. A few discovered the truth about their nature and either joined the rebellion or went into deeper hiding. These lost Force sensitives represented potential never realized, knowledge never transmitted, a generation of Jedi who never got the chance to be Jedi. When Luke eventually did begin training new Force users, he would have to start almost from scratch, lacking not just the infrastructure of temples and archives, but also the peer community that had traditionally supported Jedi training. The Purge's impact on non-Force sensitive populations was more subtle, but no less significant. People learned not to trust their protectors, that those in positions of authority could turn against them without warning or reason. The clone troopers who executed Order 66 had fought alongside the people they served. They had saved civilians, protected refugees, died to defend Republic worlds. And then, in a single moment, they became executioners of the very people they had been training to protect the galaxy. This betrayal damaged the social fabric in ways that persisted long after the Empire's fall. It became harder to organize collective action when you couldn't be sure your allies wouldn't suddenly turn on you. It became harder to trust institutions when the most trusted institution in galactic history had been destroyed. The cynicism and atomization that characterized the Imperial period had roots in the trauma of the Purge. Conclusion: the Great Jedi Purge began with 2 words: execute Order 66, and officially ended 16 years later on the ruins of Malachor. But its true ending came years after that, when Luke Skywalker confronted Darth Vader aboard the second Death Star and chose compassion over hate. When Vader, seeing his son being tortured by Palpatine, finally broke free of the dark side and destroyed the Emperor, sacrificing himself to save Luke.
In that moment, the Purge's ultimate failure became clear.
The Sith had tried to eliminate the Jedi completely, to erase them from the galaxy and from history. They had killed thousands. They had destroyed temples and burned archives. They had created the Inquisitorius and hunted survivors for years. They had succeeded in making the galaxy forget what the Jedi represented, but they couldn't destroy the fundamental truth that the Jedi embodied. that the Force flows through all living things, that the light side offers a path of selflessness and compassion, that one person choosing to do the right thing can make a difference. Luke represented the living refutation of everything the Purge had tried to accomplish. He was a new Jedi, trained by survivors, carrying forward a tradition that refused to die. The price paid for that survival was immense. Thousands dead, generations traumatized, knowledge lost that would take centuries to recover. But the Jedi endured. The Force preserved what needed to be preserved. And when the galaxy needed protectors again, Jedi answered the call. For those who survived the Purge, for Ahsoka and Grogu and the few others who lived to see the Empire's fall, the experience shaped everything they became. They carried scars that never fully healed. They understood darkness in ways that peacetime Jedi never could. They knew the cost of survival, the weight of being the last guardians of a dying tradition. But they also knew something the Jedi of the Old Republic had forgotten, that the Order's strength lay not in its temples or its numbers or its political influence, but in its principles. That compassion and selflessness and dedication to the light side could survive any attempt to destroy them. That being a Jedi was a choice, not just a title, and that choice mattered more than any building or institution. The Great Jedi Purge was the dark side's greatest victory and its ultimate failure. It revealed the depths of evil that the Sith could orchestrate, but also the heights of courage and resilience that individuals could achieve in response. It destroyed the old Jedi Order but created space for a new understanding of what the Jedi could be. And somewhere in the galaxy, hidden on forgotten worlds, or living quiet lives among ordinary people, Force-sensitive children continued to be born. The Force continued to flow through all living things. The potential for new Jedi remained, waiting for the day when the galaxy would need them again. The Purge is over, but the story of the Jedi continues, as it always has, as it always will, for as long as the Force binds the galaxy together, and there are those willing to serve the light. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Star Wars' darkest periods, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I create comprehensive Star Wars content designed to help you fall asleep while learning about the lore you love. Drop a comment below with suggestions for future topics. What aspect of the galaxy far, far away should we explore next? The rise of the Empire? The complete history of the Sith? Detailed character studies of your favorite Jedi? Let me know, and may the Force be with you.